This video is brought to you by Straight Goods News, Canada's alternative online news source. Visit straightgoods.ca.
And of course, the IIM, the machinists, have been unable to come to agreements in their collective bargaining. And given our fragile economy, we've said before that a work stoppage is unacceptable. Our government's concerned that the work stoppages are going to have an effect both on our national economy and, of course, on the Canadian traveling public. We all know that it's March break, especially in Quebec and Ontario, and the following week after in British Columbia. And we know this can have an effect on Canadian families, especially since this is a really peak travel season. So that's why the government, having considered all of its options today, I have asked the Canadian Industrial Relations Board to take a look at the case and the facts of the two cases to determine whether a work stoppage at Air Canada is going to have an effect on the health and safety of Canadians at large. So the matter is being sent over now to the CIRB for their consideration. I actually don't know. It's in the hands of the Canadian Industrial Relations Board right now. As you all may recall, I did send the same matter over when the flight attendants indicated they were going to have a strike. CIRB did not make a decision upon the file at that point in time. It's still a valid question to me, especially when it comes to passengers and cargo, and that's exactly why we're going to be sending it over to the CIRB.
Does this referral mean that until they come back to a decision, they will not allow for the strike?
The Canadian Labour Code is very clear that while the CIRB is considering the matter of what level of services an air carrier may have to provide in the case of health and safety matters, that they cannot affect a work stoppage. So it applies to both lockout and a strike.
And if the board comes in with a ruling, that's a mandatory ruling that both sides have to accept. That will work?
Absolutely. And we've done this in the past 6 months with companies, the Port of Montreal. We've done this with Marine Atlantic. And in both cases, the board has come back and said, yeah, there's a level of certain services that are going to have to be maintained for the health and safety of Canadians. And that's what we're doing in this case.
Does this affect both the machinists and the pilots, or just the pilots?
Both separate files have been sent. So both files have been sent. I've received a lockout notice, I should confirm, from Air Canada this morning at about 11:45 a.m. And we are referring both matters together in separate files to the CIRB for their consideration.
You're saying last time there was no ruling with regard to the onboard personnel?
If you recall what happened with flight attendants, they actually decided that they would arbitrate their own dispute at the table with the CIRB chair. They carried that out, therefore there was no matter before the CIRB to consider because it was moved.
What makes you think that it might be different this time?
I don't know the answer to that, but I would encourage the parties to take this period of time to negotiate at the table. The best deal they're going to get is the one that they do themselves. And really, at this point in time, we're on the side of the Canadian public interest. We want to make sure that if there's a work stoppage, health and safety of Canadians has been considered by a third party to ensure that the cessation of services at Air Canada is something that's not going to hurt them individually.
So now that you've taken this approach, and I'm assuming what it does is sharpens the line. Neither of them wants to be stopped by the movement they don't like. So is there any chance somewhere down the road your government will have to able back to work for this country?
Well, this part of the referral by the government is for the government to understand all the parameters, and in our case, it's what's on the best part of the Canadian public interest, which is there a health and safety issue? We already talked about the national economy. We know what the effect is on the traveling public. Is there an effect on health and safety? Once we get that information from the CIRB, they deal directly with the parties. Separate and apart from that, they should be negotiating collectively at the table instead of having Canadians, the traveling public, and businesses very concerned about whether or not they're going to be able to get to their destination starting next week.
At what point did you consider?
I have to tell you that this is, there are 6 bargaining units there. We have seen 4 failed ratifications. We see very difficult negotiations at tables that culminate in agreements that members simply don't ratify. I think Air Canada management and Air Canada unions should really take a lesson from this and determine what their own internal labor relations are like, because it is not the role of the Canadian government to put this much effort all the time into one single company. We have other things to do, but we stand very firmly on the side of the Canadian public interest, the national economy, the health and safety of Canadians, and that's why we're doing what we're doing.
Ms. Raitt, if you've already decided that a strike or a work stoppage would be unacceptable for economic reasons,
what's the point of finding out if it's also unacceptable for health reasons? Isn't that kind of a moot delays tactic?
No, not at all. I think it's really important to understand all the factors, because otherwise questions like this can come up again. In the case of the Port of Montreal, they were actually locked out, and we still found it important and necessary to make sure that we determine what level of service would have to happen, just in case. And they were in a situation where we didn't prevent a strike or a lockout. They were actually locked out, and we wanted to see whether or not there are certain aspects of the shipping of the Port of Montreal, and there was. It was cargo to the province of Newfoundland and Labrador, pharmaceuticals that had to go through, and had no other way to get there.